Well, greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome back to the second half. Before we get into it, though, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon and PayPal to help the channel to continue to grow and go. The links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below. My merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman, Frightening Encounters, Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description as well. And last but not least, the best way you can help this channel to continue to grow and go is simply subscribing and clicking the like button. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on to today's second half. Shall we? Today's first encounter. Back 36 years ago, my dad had been a Marine. He was a tough guy. He started taking me hunting at 7 years old. I had killed my first deer at 9. By the time I was 12, I was hunting by myself. I'd loved deer hunting. I would bow hunt, rifle hunt, then I moved on to dog hunting, never missing it. I was 16 when this happened in Louisiana. It was the 1985 deer season opening weekend of rifle season, and it was going to be cold and high winds blowing. I told my mom I was going to go to the old Rock Creek stand for an early morning hunt, and she tried to talk me out of it because of how bad the weather would be. But I said I can't miss opening day. I made it to my spot and parked my truck well before daylight and started the walk into my stand that was 2 miles away. I made it to my climbing stand before daylight and settled down waiting for dawn. It was cold, like bone cold, and the wind was blowing 35 to 40 miles an hour. I sat in my stand for an hour and a half past daylight when I thought to myself, I'm freezing. I can't stay out here any longer. But I didn't want to miss opening day. I wanted to bring home a nice buck to impress my dad. So I decided I would walk toward the creek, which was another 2 miles away. Hit the creek and follow it to the old duck pond. I got down and started my slow, still hunt. It would take me about 30-35 minutes to make this walk, but still hunting is slower, so I'd say 50 to 60 minutes. I got off my stand at around 7:30, adding the 60-minute walk, and this encounter happened between 8:30 and 9 a.m. I believe the very high winds and walking through the old bluff made it to where I could not be seen or smelled. I had made it almost to the creek and had seen nothing. It was like nothing was out in this weather. The wind was howling, but there was no other sounds. I kept thinking to myself, even the animals are smarter than you. Just before I got to the creek, there's this old bluff, and I walked down into that draw and started walking up to the creek. As I stepped onto the top of that draw and looked down at the creek, I saw something sitting on the other side of the creek about 20-25 feet from me. My first thought, oh man, it's a bear. But then it quickly stood up on 2 legs and was looking right at me. My mind was trying to process what exactly it was that I was seeing. The creature looked confused, and its mouth started to open and close. It had a large mouth. It was clenching its hands, opening, closing them, flipping its hands oddly, and it was covered in brown to light brown fur everywhere except for its face and the sides of its legs between the hips and knees. The face was a light color, and its skin looked old and sun-dried. It had a large, flat nose, a thick brow line, and it had human-like appearance. But it was not a human. It wasn't an ape or a bear either. It started to look all around and then turned and started to walk away from me. It would turn its shoulder and its head to look at me as it was walking away. I had my .30-30 rifle in my hands and my .357 Magnum in my holster on my side, and I never not once thought about shooting this thing. I quickly turned and started down the old draw, and by the time I was down there, this weird, loud noise started up all around me. At the time, I had no idea what the sounds were, and I was panicked. I now know the sounds were tree knocks, and there isn't any way of knowing how many creatures there were. but by the tree knock sounds that were coming from everywhere, they were all around me. I had 4 miles to make it back to my truck, and I remember I was scared, real scared. This thing could have snapped me in half. I knew if it came after me, my 30-30 would kill it, but it wouldn't stop it from reaching me, and it would die long after. It had already killed me because I didn't have the knockdown power to stop it. I kept thinking the whole way out, it's right behind you. It's going to grab you. But in truth, nothing followed me that I had seen. I would run until my lungs felt like they were going to burst from the cold, and then I would stop and slow walk, trying to catch my breath before running again. I made it back to my truck, got in, and drove away. I had to stop some miles down the road because I was shaking so bad I couldn't drive. That moment gave me PTSD for a long time. It was over a year before I went back into the woods, and I didn't go before daylight. When I finally did go back, I would be in my tree stand and see something off in the distance, and begin to sweat, only to see that there was nothing there. I was traumatized, but I never understood why. The creature didn't attack me. It wasn't even threatening to me. Back then, there wasn't any help for PTSD. I didn't go and see a doctor. My dad was in Vietnam, and I talked to him, and he told me things he saw in the war had given him PTSD as well. But he was told PTSD was an outward expression of an internal struggle, and with family support, I would get over it, and I did. I then started wanting to see this creature again, and I just knew that one day I'd get my chance. I never did. 36 years of hunting, camping, and fishing the swamps and lakes of Louisiana, and I've not seen so much as a track. When I went back hunting, I kept my 30-30 at home and used a 300 Magnum for a long time. And then I went to the 270 rifle after seeing what a 300 Magnum did to a deer I was hunting. Too big of a rifle for deer, not big enough for a Sasquatch. I wasn't hunting this creature. The larger rifle was more for my feeling safer. I wouldn't shoot this creature unless it was a life or death situation. Well, that's my experience. Take it or leave it. Either way is fine by me. I'm not trying to convince anyone that Bigfoot's real. I'm just telling you guys my story. I swear what I just wrote is true, and to the best of my memory. I have no reason to lie or make up such a story, and I've not told this story for 35 years. It has been such a relief to finally tell what happened to me on that deer hunting trip. A second encounter. This encounter occurred on February 2nd, 2016, between 5 and 8 p.m. in Pullman, Washington. I was living in Pullman, working and completing graduate degrees at Washington State University. I know the exact date because I have a habit/hobby of writing bad poetry. And so when some phrase pops into my head that I want to write down, I jot it in the notes on my phone. That day I wrote, and this is true, I'm afraid to walk alone, afraid I'll meet the devil on the road. Until writing this, I had honestly forgotten about this strange detail of the story, which in retrospect is probably the least explainable aspect, as it implies the encounter was somehow more than coincidental. Pullman is a small college town that is extremely walkable. For anyone who may be hearing this is familiar with the area, I commuted on foot daily from Lamont Street to Military Hill, down the walking/biking path, and up College Hill via Stadium Way, mostly to campus. So I would walk down a hill through a valley on the bike path and up a well-lit hill into a college campus, taking about 45 minutes. Some other relevant details about Pullman are that it is extremely isolated, surrounded by rolling wheat fields, to an extreme degree of deforestation, basically solely populated by local townies and undergrads. The sun goes down famously early in any season but summer. Drunk undergrads are common, but very uncommon far from College Hill, where the encounter took place. It's not enough of a town to have a homeless population, and drifters are few and far between. To the point, I was walking home that evening in the dark as I had 100 times before. Upon reaching the nearly base of the street that I lived on, where the bike path would lead up to a nearby road, Grand Ave, I saw the form of a humanoid crouched in the path ahead. While the road is somewhat lit, the bike path is down a small berm from the road and is very poorly lit in this spot. From about 60 feet out, I began to feel fear, as I could not make out much more than the form. About 30 to 40 feet from the crouched form, I stopped. I think if the figure was wearing clothing or had human skin of any shade, it would have caught more light. Instead, it looked too large to be a human. Its back was too curved, its head too far forward, and though I saw no evidence of fur, the context suggested to me very heavily that it was fur-covered. My inner dialogue ran through the options, and nothing made sense. If it was human, it was a very tall man crouched over as if balling himself up in the road, back deeply arched over. If it was not, it was humanoid, and something people do not generally believe exists. Those are really the only two options. I began to have a fight or flight response. I said, "Hey," at a moderate volume, something like 2 or 3 times. The form moved. It looked like it was turning its head toward or away from me. I never saw its eyes or any kind of light catch it. It just looked like it was hunched over, crouched humanoid in the middle of the bike path at night, too large to be a person whose high school didn't try and get them to play basketball. And hey, maybe it was a drunk basketball player a half a mile from campus, or maybe not. I was torn between the realization that I was potentially witnessing something fantastic and would live beyond the moment. The will to live fear, I guess, won. I immediately clambered up the embankment to the road, crossed the road, and walked the rest of the way home on the other side. The height difference, darkness, and existence of the berm kept me from seeing the form any further. I walked up the hill to my apartment, locked the door, and reflected on the bad poem line that I had jotted earlier. I wondered if I was being followed by some evil creature and would be further haunted. Nothing else happened, and it would become a funny story I told my friends in town. I don't know if this experience and its details may be useful to anyone, but I wanted to offer it up. It's true. It happened. I have no explanation for it. Even if it was a human, it's a strange coincidence with the note. Maybe the most likely scenario is a stressed out graduate student hallucinating. I don't know. Today's third experience. This happened a few months ago during the summer of quarantine. I was running through a wooded trail in my area. We have pretty good woods here. I was jogging, hoping to see some wildlife, maybe a deer or something similar. We have a lot of deer in our area, so it's not too far-fetched. I understand this may seem odd and weird, but it's true. I was alone at the time, wearing a black tee, gray joggers, running shoes, plus a light neon orange vest to dissuade any hunters in the area. Less of a serious thing than a precaution. I was jogging, and I had earbuds on while listening to some tunes, less intelligent on my part, yeah. I passed by a pond, and I slowed down because lying there, right, are 2 bodies. One looked like a coyote of some sort, the other was a deer. There were lots of flies all around. The coyote was untouched except for the killing blow to the stomach, but the deer was ransacked. And I go closer to the bodies out of sheer curiosity, and neither have rigor, which seems extremely odd considering it was afternoon around 4 p.m. and sunset that day was like 7:30ish. For those who don't know, rigor mortis is when the body stiffens up and the joints can't be moved. This happens to all animals. Rigor takes anywhere from 2 to 12 hours to set in. 2 to 6 for the lower extremities, 6 to 12 for the entire body, like the chest, neck, torso. These things were floppy. That immediately got my guard up, as that means they had died within the last 2 hours by something large and dangerous. Given that fact that the coyote's stomach was slashed open and visible, I sort of just brushed it off. But take out an earbud so I can keep one ear open while enjoying my music. I keep running and I start thinking I'm hearing panting and footsteps behind me. But then my rational brain realizes, oh, that's what I'm doing, breathing hard and running through a forest with freshly killed dead animals near me. So I start picking up my pace. What happened next stuck with me. A branch broke behind me, something that I simply ran by and didn't step on. It snapped like something stepped on it. So I stopped panting and held my breath. I still heard the panting, so my mind went, oh my God, but it was fairly faint. I thought, well, whatever's behind me will outrun me, so I can come to a stop, heart pounding, pulse racing. I turned around slowly, and there's nothing behind me. But I do see a dark-haired, clawed foot coming from behind a tree. This was not a bear's foot. It was splayed out, with claws on each toe. There were 5 toes, I remember. It was also larger than my foot. I'm an American-sized 11 men's. I whip around and start sprinting. I hear whatever it was start to run too. I get to the end of the path, near a main road with cars going down it. I get to the edge and turn around. There it is. Some sort of dog-like, wolf-like man. Had no tail, and it was on all 4s, with very dark brown, maybe black hair. The ears were straight up like a Doberman's. The eyes were yellow. The animal was very muscular, in general. Not super toned, but like naturally toned. I could see the muscles on it. It reared up on its hind legs, and this creature was way over my head. I'm 5'11". It was probably 7.5 feet tall. I'm almost certain this was a werewolf or lichen/dogman. I'm from the Northeast, Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Vermont area. Today's 4th experience. This one's a doozy, and it still bothers me to this day. I was in high school at the time, and it was around 1 a.m. on a Saturday night. Me and my best friend were just hanging, playing some League at the crib, when we get a call from our other friend who was too drunk at a party and needed to get picked up. Whatever, we are sober, and he's gotten us before, so we set out. We pick him up and throw him in the back seat and begin our journey home. We live kind of out in the country, so it's a bit foggy and no other cars are on the road. When all of a sudden, as we come around this turn, we see this animal thing. A ball of reddish-brown fur just hunched over in a ditch on the side of the road. I thought it was maybe an injured bear or big-ass wolf, so I slowed down to a creep and blast my high beams. This thing proceeds to turn its head and look straight at us, beady little red eyes, pointed ears, and a snout a lot like a wolf. I can't look away from this thing, as our drunken friend is rolling around in the back completely unaware. This thing then stands up on its hind legs and turns to face us. Looks like a werewolf/vampire mix, fangs poking out of its mouth. Long pointed ears, covered in long reddish-brown fur that's thinner on its chest than its midsection. It's taller than the street sign that's next to it in the ditch, easily 8 to 9 feet. It's lanky as hell, but still I can see some muscle definition. And it's just staring at us. I glance over at my buddy in the passenger seat, and he's sunken way down, shaking, just saying, "Drive, drive, drive, dude, please drive. Jake, please, drive." I turn my head back to decide if I'm going to have to run this thing over. This thing gets down on all 4s and bounds across the field next to it at a breakneck pace. And I just sat there stunned, snap out of it and drive home, questioning if I go on to be one of those crazy Bigfoot people and spend the rest of my life hunting these things. Nobody ever believes me when I tell them the story, but I can still call my buddy up and ask, "WTF did we see that night, dude?" and he immediately knows what I'm talking about. So, yeah. And now I spend 90% of my time in the forest and outdoors for my job, always knowing that crap like that really does exist out here. So, for most of my life, I've suspected that I'm not human. Not only in the sense of dysphoria I felt about my humanity, but also because, well, psychologically, I don't act human. Part of this probably has to do in a large part of my Asperger's. But it's not just that. I'm also an extremely strong empath, and that's always led to certain perspectiveness that has allowed me to read people in the room like a stack of cards. Most of my conversations are planned out 3 steps ahead. Anyway, moving on. I had a lot of recent experiences while participating in the occult that has given me the resounding yes in the non-human department. Well, I don't personally believe in David Icke's theories on reptilians, and think he's a fake. I can't discount the weird coincidences that reptilians and my non-human nature have in common, assuming he didn't pull it out of nowhere. Maybe there is something to this theory after all. I mean, I see a lot of references to ancient evidence, and while I can't seem to find anything credible, maybe I'm just not looking hard enough. So first of all, I'd like to say that I'm extremely powerful empath, which combined with my analytic personality means even when I am not focused, it's hard for me to not subconsciously manipulate situations in my favor. Secondly, I can pick up advanced psychic and occult techniques ridiculously fast, like on the first try after just reading about it. What is this anime level fast? I also recently found out that as an amateur in their 20s, I've been using master level meditation techniques. So you see, this non-human part of myself is extremely aggressive. I've learned recently that I was likely a warrior guardian serving as a minor deity for another god in the past before quitting. I then proceeded to incarnate as a human out of spite, and I'm pretty sure I picked this body because of its bloodline. You see, I have a lot of Celtic, Roman, Egyptian, Jewish heritage that is very royal, as in I am the exact likeliness of one of the Roman emperors and possess extremely high-level Celtic nobility in my blood sort of royalty. This matters because I feel as if my former post was in the Egypt, Ireland. They're historically linked. I've been to Ireland and I felt an immediate connection to the power boost, and I've always felt a similar connection to Egypt. For some reason, I've always been extremely attracted to the god Anubis, and the first time I saw the god Sobek, I had an instant bro connection, which led me to write a short story about someone who he incarnates ironically. Then there's the fact that all of my dreams have typically taken place in underground locations, had underground elements, or possessed no windows. In addition, while I am capable of going to higher energy states, most of the time I prefer to interact with beings of low energy states. I was even a talent scout by the Hell Dimension at one point, which was interesting. Extradimensional abduction is a lot worse than extraterrestrial ones. And that's not the first time I've professed an ease in traversing realities or dimensions either. Also, while I would never hurt anyone not asking for it, the descriptions of reptilians having a more feral personality seem to fit me very well. I have what I like to call a berserker rage mode, in addition to thinking much more psychopathically than most humans. Also, ironically enough, shapeshifting has been my number one goal with the occult since day one. I had an amateur past life regression session where I saw myself in a Celtic looking location covered in green scales with black tattoos all over me, living in a hut by the river. At some point, there was a war and I killed one of my human buddies at the Egyptian looking obelisk that reappeared in some sessions dealing with other stuff. Interestingly enough, I later learned obelisks are sacrificial in nature, which is how the whole murder thing sort of came off. I also had a spiritual attack, which I managed to ward off when I was 5 or 6 by an unknown spiritual entity. Looking back on it, I'm pretty sure it was preemptive trying to kill me. So, what do you think? Am I crazy? Am I a reptilian? Or am I something else? Real quick, guys, what do you think? I'll look for comments about what this guy is. I don't know if he's what he claims to be. Part of me thinks he's kind of nuts, because if he was who he said he was, he would know what an obelisk was, wouldn't he? I mean, he wouldn't just say, later I learned what an obelisk is. Because, like, if you are what you claim you are, you'd know. Let me know what you guys think, please. All right, guys, with that, I want to thank you all for tuning in for the second half. Please, everyone, be safe. And may the Great Spirit watch over us all. May He guide us down that path that we call life. Until tomorrow, my friends.